What's up, everybody? Let me just take care of this really quick. It's been almost a week since I've made a video. I figured I should probably get some content up. This is going to be pretty laid back, as most of my videos are. You probably won't find too much edited content. There will be content that I do edit if I'm sourcing information or if I need to do screenshots of information that I'm sourcing or anything like that, but most of what you're going to find on my channel, to be completely honest, is going to be free-flowing discussions like this. You're going to see me make mistakes. You're going to see me make grammatical or verbal gaffes. Just because I can't necessarily say that everybody feels this way, but for me, when I see somebody with content like that, it makes me feel more like I'm a part of the conversation rather than being lectured about whatever particular topic the person has to be discussing. And tonight I'm going to be talking with you guys about my journey to atheism, how I became an atheist, why I became an atheist, and where I think that I will be in the future. I don't plan on ever not being an atheist, just because my mindset has changed a lot. Oh, that's good brew. My mindset has changed a lot. What is moving around back here? I don't want that doing that. My mindset has changed a lot. I've become the kind of individual who is not easily swayed by assertions and claims. So just to get started here, for the vast majority of my life, all the way up until I was about 18 going on 19. So close to 19 years of age. We'll just say 19, because I think it was only about a month or a month and a half away from me turning 19. I was a theist. I was a devout Catholic. I've been baptized a Catholic. I was confirmed a Catholic from 6th grade to my senior year of high school, 12th grade, for those that are not in the United States. I went to what are called CCD, or catechism, which are classes where you learn about scripture, where you learn about interpreting it within the framework of Catholicism. And I understand a lot of Christians, mainly evangelicals, think that Catholicism isn't really Christianity. You won't find that sentiment anywhere within academia. Academia just doesn't take that notion very seriously. And so I might get people saying, "Oh, well, you were a Catholic, you were never a Christian." That's fine, think what you want. Just remember that if you're going to argue that Catholics were never Christians or aren't Christians, then you are essentially admitting that Christianity is not the largest religion on the planet, because there's about 2.2 billion Christians and 1.1 billion of them are Catholics. But I've been a Catholic for most of my life, so I do know what it's like to be religious. Starting about the beginning of 2012, which would have been the end of my sophomore year or 10th grade of high school, I started to question my faith quite rigorously. I wanted something that, at least to me, was definitive in showing me that I had grounded beliefs, that my beliefs were based, to use more modern internet terminology, that they were reasonable, that there was a reason to believe in the things that I did. And I stumbled across, I believe originally it was his debate. It would have been William Lane Craig, who I'm sure everybody listening is probably familiar with. I believe it was his debate with Christopher Hitchens. And in this debate, I saw him give a number of arguments for God's existence. I can't remember all of them that he gave, but I do know that he gave the teleological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, the contingency argument, the moral argument, and I believe the ontological argument. If I might be wrong, but I think in his first, because I think he's had two, I might be wrong on that as well, but in his first debate with Christopher Hitchens, assuming that there were more than one, I do believe that those were the 5 arguments that he gave. And me being an individual who's always been interested in science, especially astronomy and astrophysics and other realms of physics, the 2 arguments that spoke to me most significantly were the Kalam cosmological argument and the teleological argument. And I started to dive more into the researching the science behind those. Like, what were the professionals within these fields saying? Were they saying that the universe did indeed have a beginning? Were they saying things like, yes, the universe appears to be fine-tuned? And albeit yes, professionals do say that, in relevant professionals in those fields, but they mean those terms much differently than people like William Lane Craig and even others like Frank Turek would have you believe, which is part of what played into me coming away from religion, but I'll get into that later. So I have to credit, at least at the time anyway, my reassurance in my faith primarily to William Lane Craig, because even today I do have a lot of respect for him. I do think that he's a very, very skilled interlocutor. I think that he's a very skilled debater, and I think that he knows his arguments well. I would disagree with his arguments. I think that there are reasonable places where one can object to the arguments that he brings, but I think he does a good job of defending them against the majority of atheists that he've debated. Mainly because a lot of atheists, whether they're professionals, like say in the realm of philosophy or science, or just lay people like myself, people who are just normal people who happen to be atheists, I've noticed that there are a lot of atheists out there who aren't that adept at either A, bringing their own arguments to the table, or B, being capable of objecting to the arguments that theists bring to the table. I have found that I am actually quite adept at both. I think more so the latter than the former, just because it's hard to bring evidence for not something, more so than it is to bring evidence for something, which is why it's hard to bring evidence. I'm not going to say prove, because I don't think that atheism could be proven. I don't think theism could be proven either. But to bring evidence for a not something is always inherently going to be more difficult than bringing evidence for something. But in terms of objecting to theistic arguments, I do find myself, not to sound too conceited, but I do find myself quite adept in doing that. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that I've heard these arguments, I've argued these arguments on numerous platforms over the course of probably, I'm ready to say about 4 years, 4-ish years. So I know the arguments well. So I know the ways in which most theists are going to argue for them. But William Lane Craig really did reassure my faith at the time and give me a reason to say, you know what, hey, I think it is reasonable to believe that God exists. I think that what I believe in is reasonable. Another apologist, somebody who I still have a great amount of respect for, that was integral in reassuring me in my faith, was John Lennox, who is a mathematician, a philosopher of science, and naturally a Christian apologist, I believe at Oxford University. He was somebody who I was also a very big fan of, and both of these men were pivotal in helping me not recapture my faith, because I never really lost it. I just wavered in it a little more, and like I said, they really helped me reassure myself in my faith, and in a lot of ways take it more seriously. And so I do have to credit a lot of my reassurance in my faith, like I said, to those two men back when I was still religious. And I did, after gaining some of these arguments and understanding them, I did really go out, and more for the sport of it, because I just enjoyed having debates. I enjoyed having discussions with people. I would go in Facebook groups. I would be on Twitter. I would go on places like Pal Talk, even places like Discord when I first got on Discord, and have discussions with atheists and agnostics and other non-believers about why I believed and presenting my arguments to them. I was even on the Atheist Republic forums doing this, so it was something that I was very much interested in. And I believed firmly that these arguments were reasonable arguments, and I believed that they did seriously show. I never said that they proved that God existed. I simply made the same statement that William Lane Craig would make, that these are arguments that are philosophical, but have scientific evidence in support of some of the premises in these philosophical arguments. And that was the same way that he wiggles out of his assertion that he's not, how he wiggles out of committing a God of the gaps. He argues, well, I'm not committing a God of the gaps because I'm not making, scientific arguments. I'm making philosophical arguments that utilize science to support those premises. So I, at the time, also felt that I was sort of wiggling out of, because now I would classify it as wiggling out, or trying to find ways around admitting that you are fundamentally presenting an argument from ignorance, because you're trying to argue from places where science doesn't have an explanation, which majority of these arguments, that's what they are. But I looked at these arguments the same way that Craig did, that these were philosophical arguments whose premises were supported by scientific data. They weren't scientific arguments, and they weren't meant to be. I started to delve a lot more into, I should mention that I never really read a lot of books from Christian apologists or a lot of Christian philosophers. I did read some online works, some PDFs, watch their lectures, things like that, but I never read their books just because I didn't. There were other books that I was reading that were more in tune with the sciences, because that's what my interest really was in, mainly was sciences. And so I was really busy reading a lot of those books. So I didn't get the chance. I would still probably, if I had the opportunity today, and I might at some point in the future actually read some of these books. Two of William Lane Craig's books that I'd really like to read are The Tensed Theory of Time and The Tenseless Theory of Time, where he offers reasons for and reasons against, actually both of them. And fundamentally in both of those books, I think he does make the case more so for a tensed or an A theory of time, despite the fact that literally nothing in physics suggests that's the case. But as I began to read more and watch more lectures and watch more of the works of scientists like Sean Carroll, who's probably one of my biggest influences, people like Leonard Susskind, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking before his passing, I started to see some patterns, and those patterns really started to pull me away from my theism. One of the biggest ones was discovering. Let me rephrase that. And the reason that I want to rephrase that is I think, and I would say that most people who were at one point religious and are now atheist, and even people who watch this video that may have been at one point atheist and are now religious, would agree with me that it isn't ever one thing that pushes you over that edge to either becoming an atheist or becoming a faith person, a believer, or potentially reclaiming your faith. It's a set of things, and it's more importantly than that, how you interpret those things within whatever particular framework you're currently looking at. Somebody who comes to faith or reclaims their faith is somebody who was probably more inclined to that to begin with, at least at that time, and someone who loses their faith was probably more inclined to that, at least at that time. I don't think that it's ever one thing that makes somebody say, yep, now I'm an atheist, or hey, you know what, I believe in God now. So when I get people like who I have a lot of respect for, like Aaron Ra, or even some other people like Tom Jump, T Jump, and there are a couple of others out there who have asked, what was the one thing that convinced you that God is real? I don't ever think it's one thing. I think it's more numerous different things, and more than that, I think it's the way in which people, the ideological framework from which a lot of people interpret the reality around them. I think that's really the biggest thing. It's not this one thing is why I'm a theist or why I'm an atheist. It's that, well, the ideological framework from which I'm looking at the world leads me to believe that there is or that there is not a God. So that I do have a problem with trying to pin it down to one thing. Not that I think that's dishonest or disingenuous, just that I think it's the wrong way to go about it. But I began to read a lot more books by people like Sean Carroll, like I said, people like Leonard Susskind, a couple of other people, was watching their lectures, listening to some podcasts and other works like that they were doing, and I learned that time was tenseless, and I learned that that kind of is the nail in the coffin for, say, the Kalam cosmological argument. I learned that, well, humans are made up of roughly 4% of the matter energy that exists in the universe. The rest of it is dark matter and dark energy, and that life, at least as we know it, would die in literally 99.9% of places in the universe. So that kind of takes away from the strength of the teleological argument. In short, the deeper I began to delve into the sciences, and even into the philosophy behind particularly science, I began to discover that a lot of these arguments aren't really as strong as I once thought they were. And this began to pull me away from my theistic belief. And I want to reiterate, I didn't just immediately become an atheist. I went from an atheist to somewhat more of an agnostic, and I was an agnostic for a while, and then I kind of pivoted more to deism, and then into atheism, and then finally, shortly after that, became a full-on naturalist. And yes, I am a naturalist. While I can't prove it, and I wouldn't claim that it can be proven, I do think that it is much more reasonable, to believe that the natural world is all that there is. That's all that we've ever been capable of measuring and detecting. And I also think that the the definitions of supernatural are incoherent. But that's a video for another day. I'll probably get to that at another point in time. That might even be the next video, why I'm a naturalist, why I think naturalism is a viable worldview to hold to. But I slowly began to come out of theism. And a lot of that had to do with my increased understanding of science, but more so than that, my increased understanding of how science works and how we can come to say that we know things or that we're certain, and I'm not really certain, but we're confident in things. And I think that the biggest thing, what happened is, and maybe some other atheists would disagree, maybe some would agree. I think that there would probably more of them that agree, at least the ones that were theist before they were atheist, that starting to delve deeper into the sciences and starting to understand the sciences a little bit more didn't just make me, okay, there's no God because we can't show it. It was more that it was a sort of a paradigm shift, more in the paradigm of how I look at the world. What it did is it changed how I view the world, how I view knowledge, how I view the processes by which we come to things, and that slowly whittled away at my faith and my confidence in God's existence. It changed the way I looked at the world. And one of the more crucial aspects of theism, I think personally, is that people who are theistic tend to look at our physical reality, our natural world, in a top-down perspective, whereby the structure, the function, and the order, the consistency that we see in reality is imposed on it from the top to the bottom, generally by some external magical anthropomorphic immortal or something like that. I don't really know. Whereas, when you delve into the sciences, specifically the physical sciences, what you begin to realize is the structure, the function, the order, the consistency of our reality is not imposed onto it from the top down. It emerges out of it from the bottom up. And that's something I've heard a lot of physicists say, is that the structure, the function, the consistency, the order we see in reality isn't inherent to it in the sense that it's like written into it. It's inherent to it in the sense that it was always going to come out of the most fundamental aspects of how reality works. And it was really when I began to delve into the more fundamental aspects of how reality worked, quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, things like that, that really began to shift the paradigm that I use to look at the world. That I began to look at it as more of a bottom-up perspective rather than a top-down perspective, that the laws of nature are not these rules that tell reality what it's supposed to do, that were imposed on reality by some external force or magical anthropomorphic immortal or something like that, that they're descriptions of the consistencies we observe, that at least some of them actually break down at some level. And we see that with the divide between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, that the laws that govern our reality at the classical level change when we get to the quantum level of reality, where, say, my cell phone has a definite position and a definite momentum. Particles that make it up don't. That's sort of that divide. It would actually be called, I believe, the Heisenberg split between classical and quantum. But that changed the way I looked at reality. I began to look at it from a bottom-up perspective. And in doing that, I began to see less and less and less evidence, and thereby reason for something supernatural, anything supernatural for that matter. That it seemed, the supernatural seemed superfluous. That it was unnecessary. It wasn't something that needed to be assumed or invoked to explain aspects of reality. And I think that plays into what the God of the Gaps is, that these are attempts to explain things that haven't yet been explained. This is why you see a lot of theists inserting God or something supernatural into, say, the origins of life, or the origin of the universe, or places like that. Places where science doesn't really have a very good explanation for what processes were taking place here, for how these events occurred. You don't see theists trying to explain things like electromagnetism or gravity or lightning or any of these things, because they already have well-known, well-understood, and well-established explanations. And I think that that fact helps to explain why almost all arguments, I would argue really all arguments for God, are in some way, shape, or form a God of the gaps, at least when you're trying to argue from a more scientific, if you want to call it that, perspective, like say intelligent design or irreducible complexity or something like that, because they're trying to argue that God is an explanation where there already isn't one. And again, I think that that's demonstrated by the fact that where there are viable and established explanations, you don't see those being overturned by some supernaturalistic method of explaining reality. You only see that ever inserted into the gaps where science is like, we don't really have an explanation here. And then these people barge into a room like, oh, yeah, well, you don't have an explanation. It was God. God is the explanation. It was magic. And that, I do think, is to some degree, at best, disingenuous and at worst, dishonest. Because it's literally, by textbook definition, a logical fallacy. It's, well, we don't really have an explanation for this, therefore we know that this is the explanation. You can't do that. You can't say, well, we don't know, therefore we know it's this. That's not how our reality works. And I feel that, honestly, that's how, not every argument by every theist, but I think that a lot of arguments by theists are that way. And that slowly pushed me into atheism. And I think that it's something that you hear more from atheists than you will theists, that we don't really choose our beliefs. Our beliefs emerge, so to speak, or arise from the ways, the paradigms from which we understand reality. And when we understand reality from certain frameworks, from certain worldviews, certain things seem unnecessary or superfluous, like I said earlier. And that pushes us to arrive at certain conclusions. I would state that I did not just decide to believe that gods do not exist. I came to the conclusion that they don't exist, albeit not that I could prove that in any certain manner, any manner of certainty. But it's a conclusion I came to based on the way in which I started to view reality. And that way is much different from how I originally viewed reality, where I did look at it from a top-down perspective, that the laws of logic and mathematics and the laws of nature are all these prescriptive things. They tell reality what to do. They prescribe its structure, its function, its order, its consistency from the top down by some supervenient agent, rather than these being descriptions, number one, that emerge from the bottom up, and number two, that are abstract conventions of the human mind as humans have collectively tried to understand the reality that they live in. And quite frankly, that is actually, to be honest here, it's not up for debate. Mathematics, the laws of logic, the laws of nature, that's what they are. They're abstract, descriptive conventions of the human mind that humans have slowly developed and reformed and revised and improved upon, and continue to do so as we have learned about the physical reality in which we exist and the best ways to understand it. They describe what reality is and what reality does on its own, rather than prescribing or telling reality what it's supposed to do or what it ought to do. And like I said, that slowly brought me to the conclusion of atheism. And it wasn't really an easy process. I can be honest with you guys, there were some tears in it, because belief in God was something dear to me. Having that feeling that there's a sort of a friend that's always there for you, that's always there with you, that you can always talk to, that understands everything that you're going through, that knows you, that knows what you like, what you don't like, and is willing to help you if you're willing to let them help you, is somewhat comforting. I think that most people who were once theist and are now atheist would probably agree with that. So, losing that and coming to grips with reality and understanding that's not really something that appears to be the case can be hard, and for me it was hard. And I didn't really become what I would say, yes, I am an atheist in that I believe that gods do not exist. They're false, fake, imaginary, non-existent creatures, until probably 2019. Before that, I would have been more an agnostic, where I didn't really know, and in a lot of ways I didn't really care. But slowly but surely, I began to continue my research, rather study, I should say, into the physical sciences, began to understand them a little more. And that started to push me into atheism, became an atheist, and started to look specifically into Sean Carroll's work, because like I said, he's my biggest influence. When it comes to the physical sciences, I'm actually almost done reading his book, Something Deeply Hidden. It'll be the second time that I've read it. It is a phenomenal book. If you have it, read it. If you've had it and you've read it, read it again. If you don't have it, buy it and read it. Just an absolutely amazing book. Practically no math in it. Really, really good book. And he is a naturalist. He is what he calls a poetic naturalist. That yes, naturalism seems to be the case. The natural world seems to be all that is there. I mean, at least in any meaningful sense. But that there's a level of poetry there that, yeah, we don't get some agent that tells us what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to be, but at the same time, we get to choose that. And I think that there's more meaning in that. And that's another thing that I wanted to touch on with you guys, if I may. Here, let me get a quick sip in. That you'll often hear theists and religious folk make the statement that, well, atheism is nihilistic. There's no meaning or purpose to that worldview. It's just, we're all gonna die. We don't have any meaning. We don't have any purpose. We're just, molecules in motion, to quote the famous creationist debater Nephilim Free, which, quite frankly, there is a lot of truth to that statement, and that nothing really matters. I just don't think that's true, and I don't know a lot of atheists that think that's true, and I don't know a lot of people in general that think that's true, that are atheists. I don't think that most atheists would think that's true. Is there an inherent or objective meaning or purpose to anything? I would say no. Purpose and meaning are things that humans invented and that humans utilize to describe the things around them. And I think that's more beautiful. I think that's more meaningful. That we get to choose what life means to us. We get to choose what our purpose is, instead of trying to figure out what some magical anthropomorphic immortal wants it to be for us, and sometimes struggling with that, like praying, what is it that you want me to do? What is it you want me to be? Where I get to make that decision, where this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be. I truly believe that's more meaningful. I find more meaning in myself being capable of making those decisions and living my life the way I feel is best for me, doing what I enjoy, doing what I want to do, rather than trying to find what somebody else wants to do for me. I want to mold myself into who I want to be, rather than being molded by something else. So that's sort of my take on atheism, my take on my journey to atheism. Hopefully, a lot of people can sympathize. A lot of my probably largely atheist audience is something that they might be able to sympathize with. In the comments section, be sure to give your own stories on your journey to atheism, or what atheism is to you. If you'd like to, I'd be interested to hear. If you're interested in my content, if you liked this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up. I don't care if you hit the thumbs down, because apparently I've been told that in the YouTube algorithms it promotes the video either way, so I don't really care. But hit the thumbs up, just because, why not? If you like the content, if you like what you see, if you like what I say, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Ring that bell so that you can be notified of any content that is to come, because I have a lot more coming. And until next time, my beautiful and intrigued human beings, goodbye. I should also leave you with Percassum nos perfectum.